Heather Osgood, and I'm so pleased to be with you today. I hope that you're all doing well. Today, I wanted to talk to you a little bit about fear. I don't know how many of you have the pleasure of being in our Facebook circle, but there's been a lot of talk about fear in that group lately. And I was just thinking about kind of what propels people and the direction that they take and the choices they make. And one of the big deterrents that people really face is fear. And according to WashingtonPost.com, there's a very common list of 10 top fears. Of course, the number one fear is the fear of public speaking, followed closely by a fear of heights. And then there's bugs and snakes that people are really afraid of, claustrophobia, flying, kind of all of the typical fears that you might imagine are out there. My favorite on this list is a fear of zombies. And you have to actually believe in zombies, I would guess, to have a fear of zombies. And I just thought that was hilarious because I don't know how many of you have a fear of zombies, but that's not ever something that's been on my radar as a fear. But people do have really deep-seated fears, and these fears really propel them in different directions, whether it's a positive direction or a negative direction. It really is kind of the foundation of what stops you sometimes from taking real action. And so I wanted just to talk about fear and how we can overcome fear. So the first step in overcoming fear is just to face your fears. And facing fears can be a really, really difficult thing to do. And I have to say, take it from me, I am an expert on fears because I have had many fears in my life, as I'm sure that most of you have. One of my favorite stories about overcoming fears happened at a ropes course that I did. I have a big fear of heights, as I'm guessing many of you do, according to the WashingtonPost.com article, because it's the number 2 greatest fear, at least in America, is heights. So my business coach had recommended that my partner and I go and do this ropes course. And I had no interest in doing a ropes course. I knew that it was going to involve being up high, and I didn't want to be up high. And so I was very against the idea, but I don't really like to tell people about my fears. So I decided to go along with the idea anyways. So we show up at this ropes course, and of course we start with kind of some benign, like pretty easy little mellow activities. And I'm thinking, okay, this is fine. This is fun. And then they walk us up to these massive telephone poles. And I want to say they were probably like 50 feet in the air. They were really high up there. And the whole concept of this challenge was that there were 2 telephone poles, and in between the telephone poles, there were 2 wires. So there was a lower wire for your feet and an upper wire for your hands. So you had to climb up this telephone pole while your partner climbed up the other telephone pole. So you're both at opposite ends, and then you have to traverse this wire, and you have to go from one telephone pole to the next. And you're not going by yourself, you're going at the same time that your partner is going. So mid-air, 50 feet up, you're going to meet this person on these 2 wires, one for your feet and one for your hands, and you had to cross bodies, so cross over this person to get to the other side. And it was pretty terrifying, I have to say, but we did it. And it was a huge accomplishment. And I really felt like I faced my fears, that I really, I went out there and I did it. And at the end of it, it was such an amazing feeling. One of the things that I learned about myself was that when we got there, my business partner, who I thought was going to be totally comfortable and just chill and good with the whole thing, turned out to be really more afraid than I was. And so through the process of really coaching her through getting up the pole and really finding the strength within herself to do it, I realized that eased my fears. And so it was a really great experience. And it taught me a lot about myself. It taught me a lot about our business and our working relationship. And it really did teach me a lot about facing my fears. And in my life, I have found that anytime I face my fears subside. And anytime I don't face my fears, they just become bigger than life. They kind of float around in your brain, they float around in your subconscious, and suddenly you have this fear that really has become larger than life because it just takes on almost like a persona or, a physical being that it feels very insurmountable. So I have found that just facing that fear head on really does help subside that fear. The next thing that you have to really look at is really fear is just a habit. You get in a habit of having a fear. I think about my son who's now 18 and I think about, just his food choices. So every child is going to be picky at some point about the foods that they do or don't like to eat. And he really has been a relatively good eater. I wouldn't say he's particularly picky necessarily, but it's been really interesting because he's coming into adulthood and now he's starting to taste these different foods that for his whole life he's thought that he didn't like. And I can think back to a particular experience where he's always really disliked beans, and I decided just to go ahead and put some beans on his plate one night, and he ate them, and he was like, oh my gosh, these really aren't so bad after all. I kind of like them. But he had built up in his mind that he really hated beans. And so it had just become part of who he was. And he realized that actually eating them and trying them again, that he liked them, that they weren't so bad. And it's the same thing with our fears. We always assume that we have this fear and that it's there and it's going to stay there. And it's something we don't like. We don't like heights. We don't like flying. We don't like public speaking. We're afraid of this or we're afraid of that. We're afraid of a spider. But the reality is oftentimes when we face that fear and when we try to break the habit of having that fear, we realize that the fear isn't as big as we thought it was to start with. And so really trying to get out of that habit, and our brain is going to just automatically go there. When you get in a place where you're surrounded by that fear, you're going to go to that place. You're going to know that, oh, that's something I'm afraid of. I can't do that. And that's what pops into your mind. You think, I can't do that. I'm afraid of that. Or you avoid it because it's a pain point and no one likes to be around pain. So you're avoiding that pain point. You're avoiding that fear. So really trying to get out of the habit and trying to change your thinking. When you think, I'm afraid of that, reframe that thought. Instead of thinking, I'm afraid of that, discover what maybe that thought means to you. Why are you afraid of it? Or what would it be like to not be afraid of that? So really kind of analyze that practice of constantly turning to fear around those specific items that you're fearful of. The next thing that's really important when you're thinking about fear is that the opposite of fear is faith. Having a deep faith that something positive is going to happen instead of something negative happening. So I live in California. I live on the beach. I'm not in the snow very often. It never snows at my house ever. And if we get a really bad rainstorm, that's kind of living on the edge for weather as far as I'm concerned. So recently we were up in the mountains and we were there for a week, and we were hoping that it would snow because it would be fun. I was really hoping there would be snow there so we could drive to the snow and play in it and then drive home. Well, just as we're getting ready to leave, probably about 10 hours before we left, it started snowing. And so suddenly I get this fear that just totally is crippling me, that I'm thinking, oh my gosh, we're going to have to drive home in the snow. And I'm not like a huge lover of driving, period. And then adding snow on top of it doesn't really make me real happy. So I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be horrible. We're going to have to drive home in the snow. We're going to get in a car accident. We're going to do who knows what. I know that there are millions of people around the world who drive in the snow every day, but obviously fears are not rational. And this was not a rational fear that I was having. However, it was a really great experience for me because I automatically went to that place of fear in my mind. I automatically thought, this isn't something I want to do. I don't want to drive in the snow. Well, I thought back to my purpose in life, and I believe that I was placed on this planet for a reason. I have a purpose, and I have an obligation to fulfill that purpose. I haven't fulfilled my purpose yet here on earth. And so I believe that I am meant to stay here on earth, that it's my time to be here right now. And so I was able to go to this place of greater faith to say, I have this fear, but my faith is greater than my fear. My faith is that I have a purpose and that I have a place and that I'm going to make it through this awful car ride through the snow back to my home at the beach. And the reality at the end of the day was that the drive was wonderful. The snow was beautiful. It was a great experience. It wasn't crowded. It wasn't icy. It was just really a lot of fun. And so I had projected all of these fears on this experience that turned out not to be fearful, not to be a fearful event or a fearful experience for me. And so it's really important when you think about where these fears are coming from to have that greater faith, to have that belief in the fact that something positive is just as likely to happen to you, if not more likely to happen to you than this fear that you have. So really consider that. The next thing that's really important to think about is that most people have this idea that they want security in their lives. And really, all security wanting or that seeking for security is really based in fear, because the only reason you want security is because you're afraid of insecurity. And when you're thinking about starting a business, you really have to examine this idea of where is that fear coming from? And in most cases, that fear is coming from this place that you really want security. You really want to know that you've got that steady paycheck coming in, that you've got those benefits, that you have that kind of calculated, reasonable day in and day out life, that your expectations are going to be met. And you know that when you have a job, that everything is going to be status quo, that you're going to kind of just plod through life and you're going to really get there, or you're just going to be where you're at, but it's going to be secure. And when you're thinking about stretching outside of your comfort zone, when you're thinking about growing, you're going to have fears that you have to face. It's just part of the process. But what's so cool about it is it's really expanding you as a human being. And there's a great book by Tony Robbins called Awaken the Giant Within. If you haven't read it, I would highly recommend it. He has a really wonderful quote in the book, and I wanted to share it with you. All too often, the security of a mediocre present is more comfortable than the adventure of trying to be more in the future. And that's really what it all boils down to. So if you're thinking about starting a business, but you're just so afraid, you're really crippled by this idea that you would prefer to have a mediocre life, that you would prefer to stay in the status quo, as opposed to reach out and have that adventure for really the idea that you could have a much more fulfilling future. And it's really important to consider the idea that taking action today is going to allow your tomorrow to be very different. If you keep your status quo, if you keep in the position you're in today, that's where you're going to be tomorrow as well. There isn't going to be a lot of growth for you. And there are some wonderful jobs out there. I'm not saying that you couldn't grow and you couldn't prosper in a career in a corporate environment. You can. But if you're listening to this video right now, if you're listening to this podcast, chances are you're not happy where you're at. You're feeling like you're in a really mediocre kind of place in life and you're wanting to break out. You're wanting to start your own business. And really going out and facing that fear. Things aren't going to be the same. If you quit your job, life will be different. I can assure you it will be different. But will it be better or will it be worse? And at the end of the day, that's a question that really only you have the capability of answering. I believe that it'll be better. And the reason I believe it'll be better is because it allows you to have your own creativity. It allows you to have your own space, your own freedom, your own really opportunity to navigate your ship, to be the captain of your life. And when you're working for someone else, they're in charge. They're the ones that are really the captain of your ship. So abandoning this idea of having that constant, continuous paycheck or having the consistency of having a job for the adventure and the excitement of starting your own business is really a future that is the right future for me. And I hope it's the right future for you as well. And each of us has to make that decision at the end of the day. What's going to be better for us? Is it better for us to stay in a very secure environment, or is it better for us to step out and kind of embrace the idea of fear, step toward the fear, and make sure that as you're stepping toward that fear that you have a really great plan in place, that you have your research completed, that you've done some focus groups, that you have a really good business plan written, that you have a really good financial projection. So it's not as though you're stepping out into this abyss of total unknown. You've really put a lot of work and effort into it, and you know that this business opportunity has the chance to really be very productive for you, both financially and psychologically, and just for your entire environment and your living experience. And so today I want to try to inspire you that if you're feeling like you're just saddled down with the weight of fear, to just try to abandon that. Try to abandon the habit of fear. Try not to let yourself go there. Try not to be controlled by fear, and try to kind of just lean into the process. Lean into that fear and see where it takes you. I bet that you can accomplish a whole lot more than you're giving yourself credit for. So go out there and just really face those fears and take the action that you need to take today to make sure that your tomorrow is different. I hope that you have a wonderful rest of your day, and I look forward to talking to you soon.